events are part of American culture. And yet, we see government coming in and tweaking this culture, if you will, by preventing Christian schools from praying at a sports event. We're going to talk about this with one of our attorneys in the second half of the show. But the first half of the show, I want to address something very diabolical taking place in our society across the country. And that's government coming in and taking children because parents don't want to have that child change their gender. They don't want that child, that minor, to be cut on and given injections and hormone shots to fuel a confusion, a dysphoria about who they are and who God made them to be. This is a real problem, and we have with us in studio to talk about this problem, and specifically a case matter that we at Pacific Justice Institute have been actively engaged in. We have with us here Michael Peffer. Thank you, Michael, for joining us.
My pleasure, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Now, Michael, this isn't just an isolated incident. I want to take a look at the big picture here first. Do we see, and I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway, do we see an increase in efforts by the government to take children, not on the pretext of being abused or beaten or given drugs, but because the child wants to change their gender, or the government thinks the child should change their gender? Are we seeing that as a growing problem here in the United States?
We sure are, and effectively, this goes to the whole issue of parental rights with respect to sexuality with the children and gender identity with children. The state believes that it ought to be able to step in and insert its will over the parent's will. And we cannot have that. The parents have to have say in what happens with their children sexually and gender identity wise. The parents have to be involved.
Gender identity dysphoria, it's a real mental condition. It's a mental condition. It's not a physical, it's not a biological. We're not talking about some circumstance where a child is born with double XY chromosomes and there's a little medical confusion issues. We're talking about a child where every cell in their body is in agreement as to who and what they are in terms of their gender.
That's right.
Their bone structure, their brain structure, everything. And so we have a child with a mental condition, and now we have some states like California and New Jersey and others who are saying, okay, we don't want to treat this like a dysphoria. We want this to be a new civil right for someone to not only have this dysphoria, but to be empowered to trump the rights of their parents as a minor and have a permanent procedure. And when I talk about permanent procedure, we're also talking about permanent sterilization. So a minor child being taken by the government and then being injected and operated on to have a permanent sterilization against the will of parents.
That's right.
I mean, I think this is really something that the average American out there is not aware of. And this is something it's not just isolated to just one state.
That's right.
This is happening across the country, isn't it?
It is. And in fact, I think over the last year or two, the social services agencies have become more and more strident.
Right.
And less concerned about what this does with the parent-child relationship. We know that it's already difficult to parent. It's a difficult job for parents. But what the state seems to want to do is hamstring the parents from doing their job by stepping in the most crucial issues like sexuality. And we've had, under your leadership, Brad, all of us, the attorneys at PJI, we have compassion towards these people who are undergoing gender dysphoria.
Right.
We understand that this is a bad deal for them.
Right.
But we want to support the parents and their ability to support their children like no one else can.
Right.
And that was the case here in this recent case where the parent was very supportive of the child. The parent just refused to go along with what everybody says she ought to do, and that's affirm this kind of confused behavior.
Right.
And the parent just refused to conform with that.
Yeah, and I am so glad we at Pacific Justice Institute take on these matters and get involved in these matters across the country, folks. As you hear these things become more and more common, contact us at Pacific Justice Institute. This was a tragic situation where the government, in fact, I think it's important to understand, the child in this matter didn't want to be taken from the parents.
Right.
I mean, the child loves their parent and wants to be there. It doesn't feel threatened, doesn't feel at risk of being abused or harmed. And yet the government said, oh, no, we know what's best. You have gender identity dysphoria. We've determined this, and we know what's best. We want to take you from the parent so we can make sure that you have this procedure done to permanently change your gender or to physically change your gender, because some people do change back afterwards, but be permanently sterilized as a part of this. I mean, this is so draconian to think that as a society, we're going to enable the government to come in and do a procedure that will result in permanent sterilizing of a person. You know, we used to do this with prisoners or people with mentally ill. Yeah. And now we look back at this and say, how inhumane. Well, we're doing the same thing to minors under the guise of, because they have gender identity dysphoria. And it's also very cruel another way, Michael, too, I want to point out, and that is these people, these children who have this done, or adults who do have this done, most of them will not live to see their 30th birthday.
That's right.
They commit suicide because of depression. Johns Hopkins University has studied this and said, this procedure, changing the gender, does not improve anything. It doesn't reduce their depression. It doesn't reduce their suicide rate. Johns Hopkins says, we're not going to do this anymore. That is irresponsible medical practice.
Right.
And there's psychiatrists out there speaking out against this, saying this is inhumane. And yet the government is doing this at at such an alarming rate. This is not the only matter there's been others, haven't we, that we've had to deal with where they've been threatening to take kids from families simply and solely because the child says, I want to change my gender, or the child says, oh, I'm coming out of the closet. I've decided after puberty during puberty that this is my sexual orientation.
Yes.
These are serious reasons for why they're taking kids, isn't it?
It's very serious. And what's crazy about this is that a lot of children go through this throughout puberty. Yes. And they almost all grow out of it, and they go their way. So what the state wants to do is step in, alter the body's chemistry in such a way that it makes permanent changes to the body when the child will grow out of it. And indeed, in our case that we're talking about, the child began to say, you know what, that's really not my issue. My issue is this over here.
Right.
So it already happened. And here the state was so ready to step in, and that's when PJI stepped in. We wanted to be an advocate for both the parent and the child that, listen, God has a say in this. And doggone it, the parent who God gave to them ought to have a say much bigger than the state.
Right. Now, when this happened, I mean, we were contacted, we stepped in, you specifically stepped in on this matter, which I'm very pleased to see. We defended the parents, but there was also a state-appointed attorney involved in this. That state-appointed attorney that was involved also in allegedly defending the parents, that attorney, had we not stepped in, that parent really would have been in difficulty, because this state-appointed attorney, Michael, as I understand, really wasn't an advocate of the parent. Was this attorney? No,
this attorney had a real difficult time advocating for the parent's right here. And we stepped in and said, no, and say, hey, it's okay if you believe the things you believe.
Right.
It's legal for you to believe the things that you believe. We want to support you. And also encouraging the attorney, yes, you can do this legally. This is sound. And I thought it worked out. It ended up working out pretty well.
Okay. What are we looking at here? How did it turn out?
The child got to go home and with the parent, and is now able to reside there. The court will maintain some supervision here because of the way it was resolved, but nonetheless, the parent is in control at this point and able to love their child in a way that is both uplifting to her, who she is as a person and who she is in God's eyes.
Well, folks, this is very real. And it looks like this is turning out just fine, which is great. But make no mistake, this can happen to you. This can happen to your grandchildren. This can happen to your children. So you need to be equipped. We have a wonderful resource on our website to help you. It's a great resource. It's called 12 Steps to Protect Your Children from CPS, or social workers. And you can get this for free. You can download this for free on our website, which is PJI.org. P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. Go to that website, download this resource, put it on your refrigerator, have it there so that you know what to do when a social worker knocks on your door and threatens to take your children or takes your children. You need to be equipped. The stakes are simply too high. We're talking about not just hundreds, thousands of children now being wrongfully taken from parents across the country, and it's coming to a house, it's coming to a community, it's coming to a state near you. Be prepared. Don't be fearful. God doesn't give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and discipline. And part of this discipline is to know what your rights are and knowing what to do. So go to our website, download this for free, pji.org, P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. Thank you, Michael.
My pleasure.
If parents knew what was happening, I think they'd be very, very alarmed.
It's not about procreation. They're learning about lifestyles, sexual activities.
This stuff is XXX rated.
And we say no to that.
You're giving girls very high doses of testosterone, and it's going to harm them.
California law requires that school districts actually put a positive spin on the HIV crisis. This is about sexual roles together, boys, girls, boys and boys, girls and girls.
You can't teach this in an unbiased way. It's a moral topic.
A lot of graphic information that is confusing.
Tells little boys it's perfectly normal to masturbate with other little boys because everyone does it.
Choose their gender.
The role playing in the class.
That's our children.
So what do we do?
We need all of you to rise up to fight for kids.
And folks, if you'd like to support the Pacific Justice Institute on either a one-time or a monthly basis, we have a fantastic, unique opportunity to do so. We have a $50,000 matching gift program right now. So if you go to our website, pji.org, you can give a tax-deductible gift that will be doubled, dollar for dollar, all the way up to a cumulative of $50,000 in total donations. So this is a fantastic opportunity. Many of you see the work we're doing. You know we do our work without charge. We're supported by moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas, a lot of churches. That's how we get our support. It's not from the government. It's not from George Soros. That's for sure. So go to our website, pji.org, and become a part of our team. That's how we're able to do the work that we do throughout the year across the United States. And we're very unique, folks, that we don't just take on the high-profile cases. I mean, I know there's people that do that, groups that do that. They take on the high-profile cases. We work hard to make sure that everyone gets help, that no one is ever left on the side of the road when it comes to the defense of religious freedom, parental rights, or the sanctity of human life. So go to our website, pji.org, and sign up to participate in this fantastic once-in-a-year opportunity to our matching gift program up to $50,000, pji.org. Also, you can sign up to get our Legal Insider newsletter. This is a great thing to have. It's once a week, it's short, it's emailed to you, and then you can know what's going on and not only support us financially, but also support us prayerfully. People say, well, how do I know what to pray for? Well, we'll tell you, we'll show you. These are specific things, real things that we're arguing in court or we're dealing with that we'll need prayer support for. That is so important. So go to our website, sign up also to get our Legal Insider newsletter at pji.org, P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. Now, in fact, many people out there, they wonder, what's so different about Pacific Justice Institute? Well, not only are we committed to making sure that everyone gets help, but we're also broader. I mean, we get involved in cases, folks, that a number of organizations won't even touch. For example, Christians from other countries, from like Muslim countries, communist countries, they've been persecuted, maybe tortured. They're seeking protection, and they're seeking religious asylum here in the United States, okay? We're not talking about someone with a fraudulent, something they're just making up, trying to get here illegally. No, we're talking about people who are legitimately being persecuted. We at Pacific Justice have stepped up to represent them and defend them without charge, because without that, they'd be sent back to their country and quite possibly killed or tortured again. We had someone from Egypt, a minister, evangelist in Egypt. This is a classic example. He had been tortured. He fled to Jordan, and then he came to the United States seeking religious asylum. This was several years ago. And at that time, the administration was committed on sending all of these people back to their countries. Christians and Jewish people being persecuted for religious asylum. They were being sent back. We stepped up and we defended this person, and we're still continuing to do so. Things have improved some in the last few years, but we're still needing to do this defense. It's still happening. So that's something for an example of what we're doing that others aren't doing. Another example is working hard to make sure that people are protected from social workers and given immediate legal protection, legal counsel on how to keep their kids from being taken. We do these all the time, all across the country. We're the only organization I know in the United States that even makes a real effort to do this across the country, all without charge. And we're also unique in that we're very efficient with our finances and how we operate as an organization. Do you know that all of our offices across the country have donated office space? Almost all of them have donated utilities. In fact, we have more offices across the country than any other legal organization doing this work. And we do it all without charge because we're committed to doing this work and making a real difference for the kingdom. In fact, we have one of those attorneys in one of those offices on the line right now, Ray Hacke, out of our office there in the state of Oregon, Salem, Oregon. Ray, thank you for joining us on the program.
Glad to be here, Brad.
Now, Ray, I just want to thank you right up front because you opened that office a little over a year ago for the Pacific Justice Institute to serve the people of Oregon. You have a number of cases ongoing right now. I just want to highlight on just one of them so people can understand the seriousness of the attack on churches and ministries across the country. I understand there in Oregon, we're dealing with a church in southern Oregon and in a small church, and they simply want to have the pastor to be able to live on the premises of the church because they have sincere convictions to make sure that the pastor is there in the community. It's not a cheap community to live in. Otherwise, you have to live far away from the church, far away from the community. You really can't minister to a community if you can't live there and be close to the people. So the church says, hey, we want this pastor, this minister to be able to live on campus, there on our church facility. That's not that unusual. And yet my understanding, Ray, is that this community has really given a pushback on this church being able to minister the way God's called them to minister. Tell me more.
Well, it's one of their neighbors that seems to have a problem with it. And the strange part about it is they're not really affected by it. Basically, they just believe that because it's in an area zoned for exclusive farm use, that anyone who lives there should be a farmer. And that, so even though churches are allowed in that area and single-family residences are allowed in that area, combining the two shouldn't be an issue. But yet, because there's an Oregon statute which says that defines churches as non-residential places of worship, it's on that basis that they've opposed the church, the pastor and his wife moving onto the church's property.
Now, Ray, from a legal perspective, this really strikes me because we see historically, churches having a parsonage. I mean, in fact, the IRS even has pastor housing allowances that come and out of that whole concept of churches providing a housing or a place for a minister or pastor to stay, and it's usually or often there on the premises. Are there any cases out there, that support the ability for a church to be able to have a minister being there on the premises?
Okay. Well, there's the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which is a federal statute that protects churches' right to basically do what they want with their property. It recognizes land use as a form of religious exercise. Oregon tax law also recognizes that parsonages may be reasonably necessary for churches to carry out their religious mission. And basically, there's also a case out of the Ninth Circuit called the Guru Nanak Sikh Society versus County of Sutter, which basically said that there is no compelling interest in ensuring that farmland is used exclusively for farms. So they can't keep churches out of areas that are zoned exclusively for farm use.
Right.
And I mean, the overwhelming, weight of statutes and case law is in our favor.
Yeah, I think that is so important for people to understand that this church they're not doing something weird from a historical perspective or from a legal perspective to want to have their pastor to be able to live on the premises as a parsonage, if you will, to be able to minister to people in that community. We're also not talking about a density issue. We're talking about a farm community. So it's not like there's issues with traffic or, access. So is there any reason given by those who had this complaint, who convinced this hostility against this church by the local government? Is there any rational basis at all? What reason are they giving to justify this, Ray?
The only reason they're giving is that there's a certain Oregon statute which defines churches as non-residential places of worship. And the question is, what's the compelling interest in that, in ensuring that, churches and residences can't be combined? And really, they're one. But unfortunately, the Land Use Board of Appeals here in Oregon, as well as the Court of Appeals, don't seem to be seeing it that way.
Right. Now, we've already taken it to those levels unsuccessfully. My understanding now, Ray, is that in representing this church, we at Pacific Justice Institute, and you specifically, are preparing to file an appeal to the Oregon Supreme Court. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And what's the main arguments that we're making before the Oregon Supreme Court? Because this is a very important case. My understanding is the other side's trying to argue the Establishment Clause. Briefly tell me, what exactly, how are they trying to apply the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to this case?
Well, basically, they're trying to assert that our LUPA and Oregon law already favorably treats churches by allowing them to set up shop in farming zones to begin with. And that's not correct, to say the least. Schools are allowed in areas zoned for farm use. Fire stations are allowed. Lots of things that aren't farms are allowed in places that are zoned for exclusive farm use. Churches are among them. And basically, churches cannot be treated any differently. I mean, that's the whole point of our LUPA, is to prevent discrimination against churches.
Right.
And basically, the neighbors here are trying to argue that it's okay for the state to discriminate against churches, and it's not.
Right. So the other side is trying to use the Establishment Clause, separation of church and state, as the premise to try to prevent churches from having the same equal treatment that they're supposed to have as other entities when it comes to land use and zoning. And that's why we had our LUPA statute, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act of 2000, on a federal level as well as on a state level. And I think it's very important that we continue to take on cases like this, because if these federal statutes are there to protect churches and ministries from being treated like second-class citizens. We see this happening in so many different ways, and this is just another classic example when it comes to churches wanting to have a parsonage to be able to serve their communities. It's like the other side is just so committed, so intolerant to the concept that people of faith can be a positive to their community, that they don't have to be afraid of people of faith and ministries and churches. They're a wonderful asset. They're serving their communities. And we at the Pacific Justice Institute, I know, are committed to making sure that they're getting the representation that they need to do so. The stakes are very high, folks. And I encourage you, once again, to get our Legal Insider newsletter to keep up with this and our other cases. Just go to our website, pji.org, P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. And once again, take advantage of the matching gift program where you can have your support, tax-deductible donation to PJI, matched dollar for dollar up to a cumulative of $50,000. So, hey, Ray, thank you once again for the work that you're doing. And God bless you as you continue the fight to protect and defend religious freedom there in the state of Oregon.
Thank you.
So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brian Dacus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.